Dear Rector, colleagues, students, and guests, as a part of METU's 60th anniversary, I would like to welcome you all to the honorary lecture of this month. In this respect, it's my pleasure and great honor to introduce Professor Edward Frenkel as the speaker. Professor Frenkel is a distinguished mathematician working in representation theory, algebraic geometry, and mathematical physics. He is a professor of mathematics at University of California, Berkeley, member of American Academy of Arts and Sciences, first recipient of the Herman Weyl Prize in 2002, fellow of the American Mathematical Society since 2013, and the author of the best-selling book, Love and Math, The Heart of Hidden Reality. Frenkel was born in Kolomna, Russia in 1968. After getting his BS degree in 1989, Frenkel was invited to Harvard University as a visiting research fellow at the age of 21 without a PhD degree. He received his PhD after 1 year of a study from Harvard in 1991. He worked at Harvard as a junior fellow and associate professor during 91 through 97. He has been a professor of mathematics at the University of California, Berkeley since 1997. He has authored 3 books and published over 90 research papers. Frenkel's book, Love and Math, The Heart of the Hidden Reality, was published in October 2013. It was a New York Times bestseller, was named one of the best books of 2013 by Amazon and iBooks, and was the 2015 winner of the Euler Book Prize. In his book, Love and Math, the love part of the title is more about love of mathematics than love of another person, as Frenkel provides a detailed story of what it's like to fall in love with mathematics. His book is a successful attempt for trying to make the world of mathematics and mathematicians somewhat accessible to those without any background in mathematics. Frenkel puts the things in the simplest and the clearest possible way to show the reader the connection between mathematical objects and the creative process of mathematicians, what drives them, and how they learn from each other. Love and Math is also an autobiography of Edward Frenkel. One learns how anti-Semitism in the former Soviet Union made it impossible for him to study at the Moscow State University, and how he got mentored by 2 distinguished professors, and how he got invited to Harvard University as a visiting professor without a PhD degree, and how he continued his academic path, which led him to research on the frontiers of Lagrange's program during the last 20 years. Perhaps the most remarkable part of the book is the way it makes serious attempt to tackle the problem of explaining the Lagrange program to the general readers, and how he got into it, and how he was fascinated by the beauty of it, and finally how he fell in love with it. Love and Math has been published in 16 languages, including the Turkish. The Turkish version differs from all others in the sense that the book includes a letter written by the Professor Robert Lagrange in Turkish under the title Türk Okurlarına Mektup, where he shares with the readers his living and mathematical experiences in Turkey since 1967. It's worth to mention that Robert Lagrange, the mathematician who currently occupies Albert Einstein's office at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, was a METU faculty during 67 and 68. And the book Love and Math is the first popular account of the Lagrange program that was launched by Lagrange during 67 through 70. I should also note that Lagrange's program being one of the central creative projects of humanity at this time, is considered by many of us as the grand unifying theory of mathematics. Professor Frenkel, on the behalf of METU's 60th Anniversary Honorary Lecture Series Committee, I have the honor to invite you to deliver your address, Mathematics and Love in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. The floor is yours.
Hello. Can you guys hear me well? Yes. Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Ersan. I'm so happy to be here with you today, and I want to thank you all for coming. It's such a, it's hard to express in words. To be able to share this lecture with you and to see so many of you here. It's really wonderful. It's a big gift and a big miracle, which I'm very grateful for and will always remember. This is the first time I'm visiting Ankara. I have been to Turkey before, but to Istanbul. I imagine there is a sort of a rivalry between the two cities. So now I'm proud to have visited your city as well, and your wonderful university, which is world famous. I usually, when I talk to my friends, to describe it, I say it is like Turkish version of MIT. And so when I received the invitation to come and speak to you. Of course, I could not imagine to have such a great audience at the time, but I was very happy to accept. And one of the reasons is that the man who gave birth to the subject of mathematics in which I work, Robert Langlands, spent a very fruitful and productive year here at Middle East Technical University in the academic year of 1967-68, which apparently was quite a year. And here's Robert Langlands at his office at the Institute for Advanced Study. An interesting detail, this is the office which was occupied by Albert Einstein. And so, but precisely at the time when Langlands was contemplating what later became known as the Langlands program, he spent that time here in Ankara, and he made some very important advances while he was working here. Today, actually, the members of the math club of the mathematics department took me to his office so I could actually see where he worked during that year. So that's a very special connection. In fact, when I was invited to come to speak to you, Langlands wrote me a letter. And you know, Ersan already mentioned that he actually speaks many languages. Langlands speaks many languages, including Turkish. And he wrote a postscript to my book, the Turkish version of my book, in Turkish. So he's very, he appreciates, Robert Langlands is a man who appreciates different cultures and different languages. And I think this is something we can learn from him. Especially today when, you know, of course English language is great. It helps us to communicate with each other. But we should never forget our roots. We should never forget our culture and our language. And so he's someone who is reminding us of this, also being so multicultural and multilingual. But he wrote to me an email back in March saying, encouraging me to come. And he said, that year I spent at METU was very important for me, not only for my mathematical work, but also from the general intellectual point of view. And so that's a kind of a special, almost like a pilgrimage place for me then to come here, to this place, to your university. So the book is called Love and Math. And so I'm so happy that it is now available in Turkish, and Paloma Publisher has done an amazing job translating it, and with some help of generous help of various people. And so I'm so happy that I can now sort of speak directly to the Turkish audience through this Turkish translation. But people have been asking if, ever since the book first came out, which was about 2 years ago in the United States, in English, they've been asking me, why Love and Math? What do you mean? Why is it called Love and Math? And so in some ways, I would like to address this question today also. And some people take it to mean that maybe I'm offering some secret mathematical formula for love. Wouldn't it be nice? So maybe that's why all of you came. The professor will come on stage and disclose that formula, which will make all of us happy and loving. Well, I'm here to tell you that there is no such formula. There is no such formula. But there is math and there is love. And they are the two pillars of humanity, really. That's how I think about this. And what I think we need, what the world needs today, is to find balance between the two. And I think we are at a turning point right now. We are at a turning point where, on the one hand, we live in a world which is gripped by violence. And we are reminded by this every day these days. Every day, you know, and I have slides prepared and everything, but I would be remiss if I did not reflect on the terrible tragedies which are happening in the world these days. We are here in Ankara, where a terrible bombing occurred just less than 2 months ago, in which more than 100 people perished, many injured. Less than 2 weeks ago, there were terrorist attacks in Beirut, in Paris, in Mali. There aren't enough minutes in our waking hours anymore to have the minute of silence for all the victims of this senseless violence. A reminder for all of us to ask ourselves, who are we? Where are we going? What kind of world are we building? And on the other hand, all the advances in technology happening today. Work in artificial intelligence, the ideas of creating robots who are just like humans, who will supplant and replace humans. All these ideas, which are being developed by multinational corporations without much oversight, without much discussion of the ethical implications. This is a struggle for our soul. Let's be honest about it. And these two sides, humanity today really is finding itself between the rock and a hard place. Of all the violence, a kind of a low-tech way of killing humans, even if it's being done with some high technology sometimes, and a high-tech way of turning us into robots and computers, perhaps, and forgetting our humanity, and forgetting our roots, forgetting where we come from and who we are. And so I think that this is why we need to have this conversation about what love is in the age of artificial intelligence, you see. Because these two things are related. They're inseparable. What's happening in the world around us today and what's happening with technology. With technology, it looks like it's fun, you know? It's like I'm a big fan of technology. I use it all the time. I have my iPhone here, you know? I have my laptop. I have a Kindle and an iPad. I use Uber, I use Airbnb, you know? And I love technology, when technology is at the service of humanity, but not the other way around. So that's what I want to talk to you today. And so, yeah, so Robert Langlands was here, and so I wanted to mention Langlands program. It's mathematical work that I mentioned earlier. And by the way, I couldn't resist putting this slide. When I first came to Turkey about 4 years ago, my friend showed me this banknote, the 10-lira banknote, and he says, look, there's a mathematical formula. So of course, this famous ARF formula, and ARF, by the way, had an office next to Robert Langlands when he was here, so that's why I wanted to put this slide. But I think this is the only country known to me which has a banknote with a mathematical formula is Turkey. So I salute you guys. You are way more advanced than the rest of the world. Of course, the next question is to know what this formula means. It's not that hard. But anyways, we'll get back to this. But what I want to say is, what I want to start with, talking about artificial intelligence, talking about technology, and so on, I want to talk about this video I did recently. So there is this YouTube channel which is called Numberphile, which I highly recommend, which puts out short videos of lectures about short videos of mathematicians speaking about some fun stuff. And then actually I will suggest, now that I think about it, I will suggest to the guy who does it to do a video on the ARF formula. That could be a nice subject for one of those videos. But I did a video for them, which was published about 2 months ago or so, 3 months ago maybe. So it has about 200,000 views now. The channel has more than 1.4 million subscribers, so it's a good sign. So there are a lot of people interested in mathematics. And I wanted to talk about numbers and numerical representation, because what bothers me in today's discussion about artificial intelligence is this idea that somehow everything can be expressed by numbers. Not only in artificial intelligence, but just in general. People say, you can express everything by numbers, you can measure everything. If it cannot be measured, it doesn't exist. But is it really so? And what I wanted to do is to offer sort of some insights of a mathematician, to talk about this from the point of view of a mathematician, as to whether everything can indeed be done justice to by numbers. And I talked about something very simple. And it was this idea about vectors. And don't worry, if you're not a mathematician, I'm not going to give you a whole lecture about vectors. I mean, what is a vector? This is a plane. This represents a plane. Just think of the screen extending in all directions to infinity. That's what mathematicians call a plane, a two-dimensional space. And these three vectors are shown. They all start at the same point. But then they it's like a directed interval. So it has a beginning and the end. The beginning is always the same, which is fixed once and for all. But it can end here, or here, or here, or here, everywhere, right? So that's called a vector. So that's how vectors start their life. They just live on this plane, and they mind their own business, so to speak. But then mathematicians come and introduce a coordinate grid. Call it coordinate system. So it's like, imagine you have a piece of paper and you have this set of lines, right? And so once we do that, you see, this is very convenient because we put the center of this coordinate system at this point, at the beginning point of all the vectors. And then every vector you can drop, for every vector you can drop the perpendicular to the axis from the end point to each of the two axes, right? And we can read off the coordinates of a vector. And lo and behold, we can represent a vector by a pair of numbers, the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate. And then I think what happens is that we forget where these numbers came from, and we start saying this vector is a pair of numbers. It's the same thing. There's no difference between the two. And I think that this is a good illustration of a fundamental mistake we do often today, is that we forget the difference. Now, is there a difference? Well, first of all, the vectors were there before I put any coordinate grids, right? The vectors were just there. But choosing this coordinate grid, there was no special choice. I could choose it like this, or I could choose it like this, or I could choose it like this, you see. There are many different choices. And depending on the choice, the two coordinates of the same vector would be different. In fact, the same vector can be represented by any pair of numbers at all, depending on, if I choose a suitable coordinate system, you see. So how can you say that the vector is the same as a pair of numbers? Of course it's not. We need to make a choice to represent. And that's the difference between objects and things and representations. And it's very important to remember the difference, you see. So I did this explanation in this video, and then the journalist who was interviewing me, he asked me all kinds of questions about this, and soon enough we were talking about other things in life which cannot be represented numerically. And then I decided to give an example, and I said, what about love? And I said, when I fall in love with someone, yes, of course, there will be some representations of that. There could be some manifestations of that. For instance, if I see my beloved, my heartbeat might increase. That's natural. Then the other things you can measure, blood pressure, I don't know, many things. But all these numbers, do they really equal my love? No. They are representing some aspects of it, perhaps, but love is infinite, and those numbers are finite, right? Finite, carry finite information. So I'm trying to explain all that in that video. Video was published. There were many comments. And here's a typical comment. So this is one more. Here's a typical comment. This one guy wrote. Does he know that love is purely a chemical reaction? So he's trying to teach me something, which love is a chemical reaction. And I was struck by this. I was struck by this. Because I want to say that the reason why we find ourselves in a bind we are right now, in many ways, one of the reasons is that we have started to believe, many of us, even if some consciously, some unconsciously, have started to believe that love is just a chemical reaction. And if so, it can be manipulated, it can be exploited, it can be caused, and it can be removed at will, you see. And so I was wondering when did we decide that? When did we decide that love was a chemical reaction? Because usually when I engage someone like this, and I have a conversation, and I start to tell them that, no, in fact, there is something. First of all, how do you explain that to someone who maybe never experienced love in their life, who maybe is blocking themselves? Because I feel we do all experience. A child is born, a child is loving the world. The child is not separate from the world. He or she is part of the world. He or she is the world, you see. But then stuff starts happening to us, and we start forgetting, and we withdraw, and we try to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves. And we separate ourselves in our minds from the world, from others, you see. But love is natural. It is in us. It's just we are blocking ourselves perhaps from seeing it. But how do you convey that, you see? How do we convey that to someone who is not aware of it? And so now, these days, it's not a philosophical discussion. What I would like to explain is this is no longer a philosophical discussion, because this strikes at the heart of the questions we are facing today, whether we are aware of this or not, in regards to development of our technology. So this is Ray Kurzweil, a brilliant scientist and inventor who has to his credit some of the most remarkable inventions of the second half of the 20th century. He's also the prophet of what he calls technological singularity, the idea that by the year roughly 2045, we will be able to create robots who will be just like humans. This is what's often referred to as general artificial intelligence, or artificial general intelligence, AGI. When I talk about artificial intelligence, it's very important to understand the distinction between what people call narrow artificial intelligence, and that has to do with apps and computer programs, for example, translation or chess programs and stuff like this. And of course, these are great, and they help us, or GPS, maps, things like that, that you find your way using those programs. That's general, there is some artificial intelligence involved. That's different from the idea of general artificial intelligence, the idea that we can create this kind of robots and machines which will be just like humans, which this idea betrays the thinking that we are essentially just robots. We are already just machines who have their hardware and software, and so it just becomes a matter of uploading, downloading, and replacing ourselves with machines, you see. So that's what this idea betrays. And so he's one of the theorists of that idea. He's published books about this. But what a lot of people don't realize is that actually, about 3 years ago, he was hired by Google, which of course, as you know, is the world's biggest and most powerful information technology company. He was hired as a director of engineering, in charge of their research and development related to artificial intelligence. And Google is buying artificial intelligence companies, robotics companies, left and right, has been buying in the last few years. They bought a company which is called DeepMind for close to $500 million about 2 years ago. They invested about $500 million recently to a kind of a virtual reality, augmented reality company called Magic Leap, close to $500 million recently, and so on. There are other companies as well. It's all available information. We don't talk about it this much. We don't talk about this much. And here's a man who is directing this effort, artificial intelligence effort, at Google. And here are some of the quotes. He says, we will be able to fully back up our brains. We'll be able to think in the cloud. Well, some of us are already thinking in the cloud, I suppose, but it's a different kind of cloud. He's talking about the cloud that, the network cloud. We are going to put gateways to the cloud in our brains. By the late 2030s, human thought will be predominantly non-biological. And then by 2045, he says, we'll be uploading our entire minds to computers and become immortal. He's obsessed with immortality, as are a lot of people in the technological industry. I call them the men of Silicon Valley. I live nearby. I live in Berkeley, which is very close, about an hour drive. There are some women too, but not enough. And in fact, it would do them a lot of good if they included more women into their circle. But for now, it's mostly men of Silicon Valley. So sure that their knowledge of science and mathematics proves to them convincingly that they are nothing but machines, that the world is nothing but an algorithm. Life is nothing but an algorithm, you see? And so they are taking all of us on this great journey to uploading everything and putting stuff in our brains and so on. But does it actually have any basis in science? Or does it have a basis in something else? Perhaps in psychology of these people. Perhaps there is a reason why they're so convinced of this and why they are trying to convince us, all of us, that that is the case. You see? Here's another one, the Avatar project, which is a brainchild, no pun intended, of my compatriot, a Russian millionaire, Dmitry Iskov. And you can see here, it's all very detailed. We will create a humanoid robot, dubbed Avatar, and state-of-the-art brain-computer interface system. The next phase will be a life support system, and then third phase, artificial brain to which we transfer individual consciousness into. Google it. By the way, I love Google. When I talk about Google and its practices in artificial intelligence research, I don't want you to think that I'm somehow against Google or against their products. I'm using their products all the time. Of course, I use search, I use maps, I use translate, I use Gmail all the time. They have done tremendous good for all of us, for the world, for our civilization. But we have to be aware of what's going on today, you see. Here's Dmitry Itskov. It was a cover story in the French magazine, Le Nouvel Observateur, back in June. The man who wants to kill death. We are so obsessed today about death, about killing death, about being immortal. But we talk so little about what it means to be alive, you see. How do we know that we are alive? That is the question, I think, that we don't ask so much. And he is actually not just talking about it, he's doing this stuff. This is an avatar he created in his own likeness. You see? And look how sad it is. It's a very, very sad robot, I have to say. It says in Russian, technology of immortality. You see, if I wanted to attract attention of people and to kind of seduce people with this idea of avatars, I would create a more cheerful one. For some reason, the avatar is very sad. Or the owner himself, I wouldn't say very happy either. So what is going on, you see? What is going on? So a lot of people are alarmed by this. Some of the smartest people in the world are sounding the alarm, such as Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking. Elon Musk says that we are summoning the demon with artificial intelligence. And he says, if I had to guess what is our biggest existential threat, it's probably that. Stephen Hawking says that this is the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. I'm glad that they're raising this question. I'm glad that they are making more people aware of the problem, of the issue. But I'm not sure that the way, this sort of doomsday scenario discussion, I'm not sure that this is the most optimal, the most relevant way to talk about the issue. Because you see, when people start talking about this, it immediately becomes a discussion about some robots in the future, in some kind of a sci-fi movie scenario, you see. And we're discussing, and the next thing you know, we are talking about what those robots will do to humans and so on. So we're talking about some distant future, perhaps, and it becomes a very abstract theoretical discussion. Whereas what I think the discussion really is about, secretly, and what it should become openly, is not about the robots, but it is about the humans. And it's not about the future, but it's about now. What's happening right now, about who we humans think we are, who we want to be in the future, but also right now, you see. Because the point is that if we start believing that we are machines, we are robots, we are machines, what else is there? And of course, you look at some people, the way they text incessantly. You might argue that perhaps, in some ways, they are becoming machines, you see. So if someone actually believes that they're a machine, there isn't that much of a difference whether they are a machine or not. If you believe you are, if you act like you are, in some ways, you're already becoming one. So it's not a question about sci-fi scenarios, even though I want to remind you of HAL 9000, whom you may remember as a character of the great film by Stanley Kubrick, and I highly recommend everyone to to watch it again, if you haven't seen it in a while, because the movie, which came out in 1968, was very prescient. It talked about, it talked about the very same issues that we're grappling with today. But again, it's not a discussion about the future. It's not a discussion about robots. It is a discussion about us. And I think that we have to face that fact. So what can I do? It puts me in this position as a mathematician. I'm wondering, what can I do to maybe help someone who's not a mathematician to see what's going on from a perspective of a mathematician? You see, the problem is that today we are afraid of mathematics. We have a fear of mathematics, many of us. And of course, that's the result of a very poor educational system around the world, I would say. In some places better than others, but in the United States for sure. Many problems in the math education. And so we are afraid of the subject. We are afraid of mathematics, which is why we are giving, that fear then forces us to delegate these questions to that elite, to those who claim to know. People like Ray Kurzweil, Dmitry Itskov, who claim to know that that's what mathematics and science tells us, that we are nothing but bags of elementary particles walking around. Our brains are just a bunch of neurons which are connected in a certain way. And so, why can't we then recreate that sort of by copying atom by atom and neuron by neuron, you see? But they are actually deceiving us because they're either not aware themselves or they're withholding information about some very important advances in science and mathematics in the last 100 years, which show to us clearly and unequivocally that that's not the case. And let me give you a couple of examples of the kind of science and mathematics that shows to us, gives us a bigger picture. So I want to talk about Kurt Gödel, a great logician, and I would say the greatest logician of all time. Although some might say Aristotle probably comes close, but I don't know. If logicians had a Hall of Fame, he would definitely be inducted into that Hall of Fame. Albert Einstein used to say that in the last few years of his life, Einstein and Gödel worked at the Institute for Advanced Study, which is where Langlands is working today. And Einstein used to say that the only reason why he went to work was so that he could walk home with Gödel, so that he could talk to Gödel, who he considered the smartest man around. So what does Gödel tell us? Gödel came up with a radically new understanding of mathematics in the first half of the 20th century, which still we don't fully, I think, appreciate and understand the importance of this result called Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Because you see, we kind of always assume that mathematics is this very rigid, very formal system that you start out with some axioms, and then you progress and use those axioms to prove new theorems, and then you use those theorems to produce more and more. And that is one of the reasons why we sometimes believe that this kind of algorithmic process is all that is needed, is all that can describe everything. But what Gödel did is he showed that even in mathematical knowledge, even in mathematical understanding, these formal algorithms can never give you everything, you see. What Gödel's incompleteness theorem says is that any sufficiently sophisticated and consistent formal system, consistent means it is trustworthy. It means that you cannot, it's a system which only produces true statements. It doesn't produce, or it doesn't produce something and its negation at the same time. Because if you were to do that, then you would immediately produce the statement 1 = 0, and somehow every statement can be proved. So all bets are off. So it's not very interesting. So we only consider trustworthy systems, consistent systems. And sufficiently sophisticated means that it involves all the rules of arithmetic and all the statements about natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So suppose you have such a formal system. And again, that just means you have axioms and some rules of inference, and then you're producing more and more theorems, okay? Then his theorem, and this is a mathematical statement. It's not a headline in a newspaper. You know, it's not something, it's not a belief. It's not a matter of opinion. It is a fact. In any such system, there would be a true statement that cannot be proved within that system. In other words, mathematical truth cannot be formalized in principle, not because we don't know how to do it and someone else will come and do it in the right way, but truth cannot be expressed by an algorithm in principle. And we are talking here just about mathematical truth, about the truth of mathematical statements and theorems, you see. And that led Gödel to say that human mind actually infinitely surpasses the powers of any finite machine. I think a very beautiful quote, which we should remember when we talk about the ideas of general artificial intelligence. Which, by the way, people like Itzkov and Kurzweil never address, as far as I know. And I Googled that. They never address Gödel's incompleteness because the incompleteness theorem is inconvenient for them. It puts a huge dent in this whole idea that you can create a machine that will be act in every way just like a human. I want to mention how he proved this theorem. And this is a beautiful example of human creativity, really. And also it kind of shows the limitations. It shows the essential element of the limitations of our formal logic. The root of Gödel's incompleteness is what's called the liar's paradox. Liar's paradox concerns this sentence. This sentence is a lie, you see, or this sentence is false. Now, when it says this sentence, it's talking about itself. And so you see that immediately creates a problem because it can neither be true nor false. Because if it is true, then what it says is true, but what it says is that it's false, right? And if it's false, it means that this is a false statement, therefore it is a true statement. There is no way to resolve it. And the reason for this is that it is what logicians call self-referential statement. It refers to itself. Gödel's genius was to understand that any sufficiently sophisticated mathematical system, such as one which studies arithmetic, natural numbers, will be able to produce statements like this. And as soon as you have a self-referential loop like this, self-referential statement like this, you run into trouble. So the sentence which he used is not exactly, Gödel's sentence is not exactly liar's paradox sentence, which of course goes back to ancient Greece and perhaps even earlier, but it is the sentence, the following sentence. This sentence cannot be proved. And if you think about that, if you can prove that, then you will run into contradiction, because then you prove something which says that it cannot be proved, so you run into contradiction. That means you cannot prove it. But if you cannot prove it, it means that it's true. There, you got a true statement which cannot be proved, formally proved. So you see, this is what we should keep in mind when people like Kurzweil and Itzkov are telling us that, in fact, what I'm explaining to you right now is driven purely that I'm a machine. So what they're telling us is that I, for example, is a computer. I'm a machine. That would mean that I'm operating on a certain algorithm. And what is an algorithm? It's a procedure. It's a step-by-step procedure. Yes, of course, we have more sophisticated algorithms called neural networks, for example, things like that. So beautiful mathematics involved, but ultimately, all of them boil down to algorithms, to Turing machines, if you will, you see. From another. And we know that any such system is incomplete. Moreover, the second incompleteness theorem of Gödel actually shows that the system cannot even prove its own consistency. So how can you say that a formal system, that an algorithm, can by itself represent life? If you are aware of this landmark achievement of mathematics of the last 100 years. If you don't close your eyes to this landmark achievement of mathematics of the last 100 years. Roger Penrose, a great British mathematician and physicist, has written 2 books explaining this argument in detail, what I have just outlined very briefly here. So if you're interested in this, you can find more information in these 2 books. But here are 2 quotes from his books. There is something in our conscious thought process that eludes computation. We have access to mathematical truths that are beyond any robot's capabilities, you see. That's Roger Penrose. And as a practicing mathematician, I can tell you, when I make a mathematical discovery, it's not done by thinking alone. In fact, one could argue, and I have discussed this with my colleagues, and pretty much everyone I talk to agrees with my assessment, that the moment when you actually discover something, and I think it's true not only in mathematics but in other things, there is a jump, there is a discontinuity, your thinking actually stops, and you let something else come out. Call it intuition, call it insight, call it instinct, call it inspiration, whatever you want. But it's something else that comes. And you go, aha, right? Aha. So that's sort of an experiential confirmation of this, but there is a mathematical theory behind this. Another idea, another landmark achievement of science I wanted to talk to you about also is quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics has destroyed the myth of deterministic and mechanistic universe, in which you have this sort of billiard balls flying around and hitting each other. You see. Descartes, started with Descartes 400 years ago. And 200 years ago, French mathematician Laplace wrote that if we know the positions of all particles in the universe, we'll be able to predict everything any time into the future. All of that has been destroyed by the ideas of quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics tells us that what we call elementary particles, electrons, photons, protons, etc., they're not particles at all. In fact, if you look, it's true that you can think of matter as composed of atoms, and atom has a nucleus inside, which consists of neutrons and protons and electrons orbiting around. This is a useful model, but it's not exactly true. In fact, if it were true, then you would have to realize that all of this is empty, because an atom, the nucleus of the atom, occupies only 10 to the minus 15 volume of the atom. It's like a little coin in a football stadium. The rest is empty then. If you believe that these are billiard balls, the rest is empty then, you see. It's a complete void. So of course it's not empty, because there are also forces. There is energy, which of course, as we know from Einstein, mass and energy can be converted into each other. So it's not a particle, it's not a billiard ball. Another way to think about it, so I showed you, I'm kind of running out of time, but I wanted to show you this experiment called double slit experiment, which shows you that elementary particles could behave as waves. You're shooting particles at this screen, which has 2 holes, and you expect them if they were like particles, like billiard balls, there would be 2 lumps behind this hole and behind this hole. But in fact, you see many different lumps, as if two waves are colliding. You see, that's the pattern, interference pattern you expect from 2 waves, because in some places the waves are magnifying each other. In some places they are kind of weakening each other. So it becomes a much more sophisticated pattern. This is an experiment, a landmark experiment, which has been done hundreds of times, which shows that particles act as waves. So what is it? Is it a particle or is it a wave? It's neither, actually. It's neither and both. That's what quantum mechanics is teaching us. The world, nature, is way more sophisticated than any lopsided, one-sided theories that we can come up with. So that's another way. So how can you say then, if that's the case, that a human is a bag of elementary particles, which I hear very often physicists, scientists to tell us. It's just a bag of particles. So if you copy particle by particle, you will copy a human. It's funny because during the day, these physicists work on their projects related to quantum physics, and they know that it's not the case, and yet something makes them stand, something makes us want to hold on to this idea that love is a chemical reaction, that the human is just a bag of elementary particles. What is it? Why are we sold on these ideas? I want to go back to Mr. Kurzweil, because there is something else I want to tell you, which I think gives us a clue. It's a very personal matter for Mr. Kurzweil, as it turns out. And he's not hesitant to share it with us. He talks about this. In interviews, there is a documentary film called Transcendent Man, in which he talks about it in detail. He wants to bring back his father, Frederick Kurzweil, who was a great musician, who had a massive heart attack in his 50s and died when Ray Kurzweil was young. We'll create an avatar, he says, based on emails, text messages, letters, videos, audios, and memories of the person. Let's say by 2025. And then we'll be able to send nanobots. He wants to send nanobots, nanorobots, into people's brains to retrieve memories. Totally oblivion, seemingly, of the fact that we have no idea where memories are stored. Modern science has no idea how memories are created, where they're stored, how they're accessed. Our brain is not a hard drive, which you can access and retrieve information from, you see. So how can someone like Kurzweil to say that we will do that, we'll be able to do that? Well, it's a very personal thing, like I said. A child wants to have his father. A child wants to have his father. And no matter how misguided the idea is, you see, it's very human. It's a very human emotion. Our grief for the loved ones, for our loved ones. But does it mean that we have to recreate them as robots? You see? I don't have enough time to debunk these ideas from a neuroscience point of view, but here's just one quote which says that a little worm, C. elegans, a little worm less than 1 millimeter in size, has only 302 neurons. And then biologists have mapped completely those neurons. We have know all the synapses, all the connections between those neurons, you see. 302. And a human has more than 100 billion. And the C. elegans, we still have no idea how its brain functions. Can we find out in 10 years? How can one say that, you see? So then when I talk about this, people say to me, okay, Professor Frenkel, you have convinced us that it's not possible to create robots who are just like humans. Why are you so worried about it? Huh? Let's just let it play out so they will reach an impasse. So no harm done. Well, unfortunately, even if we cannot create machines and robots who are just like humans, and or upload our brains, etc., we can do a lot of harm to humans by using these machines. And we are already doing a lot of harm to humans. And here's just one example, the drones. And the self-guided little systems which are being used and deployed, or can be deployed these days, to kill people without any human intervention. Are we even aware of this? We don't hear it much discussed, but I want to quote something from an article in a Nature magazine by one of my colleagues at UC Berkeley, Russell Stewart, who wrote an article in May of this year called "Take a Stand on AI Weapons." Take a stand on artificial intelligence weapons. And he says, in fact, I have this quote. He says, technologies have reached a point at which the deployment of such systems is practically feasible within years. There are some reports they are already being used. And so what does it mean? It means that you have facial recognition programs which grab a photo of somebody, identifying by an algorithm, and launching a strike without human intervention, without human supervision. That's called lethal autonomous weapon systems. You see? There is a film which just came out in the United States, which is called Drones, in which drone operators share their experiences of killing people from a distance. It's become a video game. A war has become a video game. You see? It's all connected. I started out today talking about violence that's happening, and how can we not acknowledge this violence? It's happening. We open newspapers every day. We watch television every day. And we see that. But part of it, of what's happening, is it's become very easy to kill people. From a distance, from drones, from things like that, you see? And this is a direct consequence of the kind of research and development that we do, or companies like Google and others do with artificial intelligence. Even if they are not deployed today, they can, and they sure will be in the near future, unless we take a stand, the way my colleague Russell Stewart is telling us by sounding an alarm. You see, that's where we are today. That's where we are. Here's another quote from an American philosopher and writer, Louis Mumford, who wrote a great book I highly recommend, Myth of the Machine. And he says that on the terms imposed by technocratic society, there is no hope for mankind except by going with its plans for accelerated technological progress. Even though man's vital organs will all be cannibalized in order to prolong the mega machine's meaningful existence. What is happening is that he wrote this in 1960. He wrote this in 1960. Are we going to allow this mega machine to take our vital organs or not? And of course, it doesn't have to be all sinister. This technology is not necessarily used for war. But it's also used to enrich a certain elite. You see, we have to be aware of this. How convenient for Google. And again, I want to say one more time, I love Google. I think Google has done amazing and positive things for humanity. But when they bought DeepMind 2 years ago, they announced the creation of an ethics panel, of an ethics board to discuss ethical questions related to artificial intelligence. Well, guess what? I Googled Google Ethics Board. There is no information about it. No one knows whether it has been created. No one knows whether it has had any meetings at all. You see? Are we going to ask Google the question? Do they agree with the prophecies of their chief of engineering, Ray Kurzweil? But of course, the point is, I can imagine Google executives who say, whether we can create robots who are just like humans or not, we're going to make some money. My good friend, Jaron Lanier, actually lives in Berkeley. He wrote 2 wonderful books. You're Not a Gadget is one, and Who Owns the Future is another, which I highly recommend. He talks about the myth of the AI. And he says, he compares that with organized religion. This artificial intelligence is becoming, in some quarters, to look a lot like organized religion. And how convenient, because they say, you are just servicing the AI. You're not servicing us, you're servicing the AI. And he says, it's a beautiful quote, he says, it reminds me of somebody saying, oh, build these pyramids. It's in the service of the deity. But on the ground, it's actually at the service of an elite. Are we going to allow this elite to use us in this way? The great psychologist, philosopher, I would say, thinker of the 20th century, Carl Jung, put it in this way, and I just can't find a better way to express this. Our intellect, he says, created a new world that dominates nature and has populated with monstrous machines. Look around. He wrote this in 1960 as well. They are so useful that we cannot even imagine the possibility of getting rid of them. So of course, I will not get rid of my iPhone. I would like to use my iPhone. I would like to use my computer and so on. And they do a lot of good, of course. But he says man is bound to follow the adventurous promptings of his scientific inventive mind and to admire himself for his splendid achievements. At the same time, his genius shows the uncanny tendency to invent things that become more and more dangerous. And in fact, what they represent is better and better ways for wholesale suicide. He actually said, here's another quote, which I think is, I would like to basically end with this quote. We talk so much about theories and ideas in general, right? And we also like to talk about those other people who are doing wrong things. We like to judge other people. We like to say, other people have to change, but not me, I'm fine, I'm okay. I think we should try to change the conversation a little bit. Yes, it's beautiful to talk about theories, and of course I spend most of my time here talking about theories, mathematical theories, theories of physics and so on. But it's also important to share our life's experiences, to look inside, each of us, because no one else can do it for us, you see. No one else can tell me who I am. No one else can tell me who I want to be, who I want to become, who I want the world to become. And it all starts with me. I ask myself, when I read about these terrible, despicable terrorist attacks, how have I allowed the world to be this way? What can I do to change that, you see? And I see here today so many young people. And this is a hope. This is what gives me hope, because of course, you know, you are the ones who have inherited this mess, so to speak, you know. And you are the ones who will get it right. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. And there is another quote which I like, with which I want to close, is that every change has to begin somewhere. It is a single individual who will experience it and carry it through. And there is no reason to believe that that individual is not you or me, each and every one of us, you see. Do we continue to march towards collective suicide, be it through sectarian violence and divisions? How convenient, divide and conquer. That has been used for centuries and millennia to divide us, to enslave us. Do we want to continue along this path? On the one hand, do we also want to allow our technology to take our soul as a hostage? Or do we want to find another way? Do we want to stop and say, it doesn't work? It doesn't work. Mathematics teaches us that there is so much that we all share. Pythagoras' theorem was discovered by Pythagoras 2,500 years ago, and it still stays the same. In fact, it was also discovered in other cultures independently, and even earlier than Pythagoras. We discover them in our classrooms every month and every year. Our kids discover them every month and every year, and it stays the same. And it means the same to everyone, no matter what cultural background, what language we speak, what gender, what skin color. Mathematics is the same for everyone. It unites us. Imagine that. The subject that most people consider as the most boring and irrelevant actually is a reservoir of precious knowledge, which no one can take away from us. In fact, no one can patent a mathematical formula, you see. Einstein could not have patented E equals mc squared, because if it's true, it belongs to all of us. So in this world in which it seems like we are constantly in a state of conflict, we are constantly arguing with each other, we are constantly disagreeing, and of course, disagreements and discourse and conflicts are unavoidable. But I think we have to remember how much we have in common. So mathematics is not going to give us an easy formula for love. There is no such formula. Our love is inside. But mathematics can help us to find that love. Thank you very much.
We thank the speaker, and now we are ready to take some questions. Yes, please. Microphone there, please.
Do I believe in evolution? Evolution is a fact, so it doesn't matter whether I believe in it or not, you know. However, believing that there is nothing else to explain life but evolution is a belief and should be treated as a belief. Likewise, our belief in rationality. My friends, you know, and I'm a mathematician, so for me it's very natural to be rational, right? So, but my friend rationalists are usually startled when I remind them that their belief in rationality is itself irrational. So they are in contradiction when they say that there should not be any irrational beliefs, because they have at least one belief in rationality. So, you see, so I'm kind of taking the question a little bit further, which is that let's not confuse different things. We have to pay attention to science and to scientific facts, such as quantum mechanics, evolution, Gödel's incompleteness, and so on. But we should not twist those facts to fit our belief systems.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other question? Yes, there's one over there. And is there a microphone? One up there.
By the way, guys, I'm so grateful for you to be here. I just want to say it before, you know, that it's so great to have this opportunity to share these ideas and to speak to you. So, and you've been such a great audience. Mm-hmm. Well.
The microphone is, yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk, first of all. Coming from a secular Jewish background, as you are, while I was reading your book, I was fascinated by the anti-Semitic situation in Russia. those times.
Yes.
And I have a very simple question coming from the same background. You have told us during your talk that math and love, they are the two pillars of the universe. But in your entrance exam, there were also anti-Semitic mathematicians. So apparently, learning math or loving math doesn't induce in us the love of other nations or other races or different people
That's right.
or the other. I must tell you that I am kind of lucky because I'm a Middle East Technical University graduate and I never felt anti-Semitic behavior here thanks to the open-mindedness of the faculty and thanks to the principles set forth by Atatürk for modern Turkey. So I am happy that I never experienced this. But nevertheless, I really wonder, how would you classify the anti-Semitic behavior of your fellow mathematicians, even though you were just a 17-years-old kid, I guess?
16.
16?
16,
Okay.
yes.
So
Well,
that was my question.
Thank you, thank you. That's a very important question. So you give me a good opportunity to address this. In fact, it's very much connected to what I've been talking about. So first of all, knowledge by itself is not going to change any behavior. It's how we use that knowledge. So you're absolutely right. Just because some people had touched this beauty, this pure beauty of the subject of mathematics, this by itself doesn't mean that they will not harbor hatred towards other people and inflict pain on other people. Now, about my exam. I was 16 years old in the Soviet Union in 1994. I describe this in detail in my book, but I want to say 2 words about this. In those days, in the Soviet Union, in Moscow University, especially in the mathematics program, this is well documented. So there are many sources for this, but in my book you can find a first-hand account. There was a policy, it was a secret policy, it was not officially, because officially all nationalities were equal in the Soviet Union, but it was a secret policy of discrimination against students who were deemed to be Jewish. And what does it even mean, Jewish? My father is ethnically Jewish, my mother is Russian, my father was not religious, I did not grow up in a religious family. The only religious person in my family was my maternal grandmother, who was Orthodox Christian, you see. So, and she crossed me when when I had to go and do an exam or something like this. So, it was purely by blood. It was purely the hatred of a particular ethnic group, which was manifested in the fact that special problems were created for students like me. So they just discussed, how did they know? By my last name. So there were ways to find out. Anyone who had at least 25%, so to speak, 1/4 Jewish, they could find out, and they would fail them ruthlessly. My oral exam lasted more than 4 hours. This was a very traumatic experience for me. And it took me 30 years to actually come back to that 16-year-old boy and to hold his hand and to give him, to take the pain. That pain was inside me for 30 years, you see. And that's what happens, you see, with us, that we get hit by hatred, by unfairness, and we don't process that pain. We store it inside. And that pain then makes us act in certain ways. That's where I find the source of the desire to rationalize everything in myself, in my own experience up until recently. It's the idea, because it gives the user a sense of control and safety. Mathematics for me actually was a kind of a safe haven, a sort of a safe harbor where I could hide from those bigots from Moscow University who inflicted this pain on me. And maybe this pain was also driving me, right, to become who I am. And you know what I learned through this process of going back and finding out? It's possible to connect to that pain. It's possible to let it out. And it's possible to move on, you see. And that's when I was also able to forgive those examiners. When I accepted what happened, I loved myself as a 16-year-old. and I brought him back. Someone said, forgiving someone is releasing a prisoner, and that prisoner is you. I didn't know what it meant until I had that experience. So when I talk about us looking inside, finding out who we are, remembering who we are, this all sounds abstract, perhaps, but it has concrete meaning. It is connecting to our pain, to our traumatic experiences, which we all have had. Because it's impossible otherwise. And there is no shame in this. It's okay. That's how it is. We break and we make whole. We break and we make whole. And my point is, it's time to make it whole again.
Yes, please. It is difficult to pass the microphone.
Thank you very much for your presentation. First, I would say we used to hear poems and love, words and love, but this is the first time maths and life I hear. And I'm engineer, and I wrote poems, and people ask me, you are engineer and writing poems. I have two questions to you. You are world famous professor, and which makes you more happy, to be good lover or to be most famous professor? And which one is the more complex, to be famous professor or to be lover? Thank you.
Well, let me think. Well, that's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful question, and happy. So I'm always a little bit uncertain about the word happiness, and because it is something that we lie ourselves sometimes. We say, I'm happy, you know. Or we could be happy about some pleasure, just transient pleasure that we got a job, we got money, we got this, we got that. But is it really happiness if it goes away and is replaced by pain again? And so this pleasure-pain cycle keeps on going, right? So what I think is, to me today, what is important is not so much is about happiness, but it's acceptance, really. It's knowing what is happening and knowing who I am and loving myself. And this sounds paradoxical, because when I say to people that, they say, because it's a very good question to ask yourself, do you truly love yourself? But I have to explain what it means, because some people think it means to be egotistical. It's kind of pulling the blanket onto yourself, and and forgiving yourself, allowing yourself to act selfishly and inconsiderately of others. No, that's not what it means. That means to be egotistical, period, or selfish. Loving yourself means knowing who you are and accepting every part of yourself for what it is. It doesn't mean that you agree with everything. You know yourself better than anyone else, what is good. And it's not even about good or bad. It's about how you can do differently. The possibility of being different, the possibility of being more loving, more kind, more compassionate. We know it ourselves. So loving yourself means precisely knowing everything about me. For example, for me, it meant to connect to that 16-year-old boy who was. Because for 30 years, I told myself the story that I was so strong that I was able to survive. You know, a lot of kids who went through this, some of them commit suicide. Some of them ended up in a mental hospital. It was really a cruel and despicable crime, really. Done to kids who had done nothing wrong. They were 16, 17 years old. They looked just like all other kids, but they were singled out, and they were basically murdered by these examiners. But I told myself the story. I was fine because I was strong enough. Well, guess what? No, it actually killed me. But I had to defend myself as a defense mechanism, I had to chop off a part of me and just leave it there and continue on and pretend that nothing happened, that I am strong and so on. But the pain was still there, you see. And so loving myself then meant also connecting to that pain and letting it out. Connecting, not to dwell in it, not to use it as an excuse for something. No, accepting and letting it out. And when you do that, you are filled with love, you see. And so I would interpret your question, what is more important, to be a famous mathematician or to love yourself? Because the point is, when you truly love yourself, that's when you love others as well, without asking for anything in return, unconditionally. Becoming a famous mathematician is ego's drive. That's the ego. And of course, I'm just like everybody else. I have my own ego as well. But I am identifying with it less and less. And I wish you all the same. So, thank you.
One more question, please.
Yes. Hello. Thank you for today, Mehmet Gümüş, Mert Lover. But when I read your book, I saw that when you met Evgenevich, your life started to be get different. And you said that you wrote in your book and you gave some examples of how we'll make lovers of mathematics person to person by different examples. And I thought that laws differ everybody, and mathematical thoughts differ everybody, but mathematical results are the same.
Yes.
The techniques may differ. And you said that in your speech, when we try to teach and learn mathematics to students or everybody, it's some problems of pure educational system. Because when I read in your book that you learned mathematics alone by Evgenevich. You tried alone at first.
That's right. Well, I was lucky.
Yes, you were lucky.
I'm glad that you brought this up because my book is, the way I think about my book, it is really a tribute to my teachers.
Yes.
And I hope that when you read the book, you realize that in my life, I was so fortunate to have some amazing teachers, and without whom I would never
my question is that, how can we give a chance, or is there a mathematical formula to different, or a pair? How can we teach or make laws, reflections to our students? Because I think we cannot get rid of the poor educational systems in classrooms. Thank you.
Good question. I feel like this is probably the last question, right? And I will be brief, but I would like to say to you, even if I don't answer your question now, I will be outside and I'll be happy to meet every one of you. So if you want to discuss, ask me questions, and so on, please come up. Don't be shy, don't hesitate. But let me just say briefly, I wish there were a formula also for math education. There are certain things which can be done. There are certain things which clearly can be done, and that is expanding our math curriculum, connecting mathematics to the real world, which, of course, we can because all technology is based on mathematics, right? But ultimately, it's up to the teachers. So the real investment will be in preparing teachers who themselves love the subject so that they can convey that love to everyone else. Thank you so much again.
Yeah. We thank the speaker again, and for the remembrance of today, I would like to invite our president to present a play to Professor Frenkel.
You gave us a reason to reflect, if not have a flow, but this is our logo and tree of science. Thank you very much again for was a very pleasant talk. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Nasıl? Anlamadım. Anlamıyorum.
Thank you, Middle East Technical University. I love you.